Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you, and I want to begin by acknowledging our FAA Administrator, Michael Huerta, who is here with me this afternoon for this announcement. I also want to thank the organization standing here with us, demonstrating their shared commitment to improve the safe use of unmanned aircraft in the United States. We have with us the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, the Airline Pilots Association International, the American Association of Airport Executives, the Helicopter Association International, Precision Hawk, and AirMap. The United States Department of Transportation is bullish about technology and transportation. The rate of change driven by technology and other sectors in our lives has now reached the transportation sector, and it requires this agency to be agile enough to adapt and integrate innovation into our national transportation system. Whether we're talking about driverless cars, register it and operate it safely to protect the public. The details of this new registration system will be developed by a task force consisting of government, leaders, and a diverse group of stakeholders who will work on a tight deadline to get this work done. First, registration will reinforce the need for unmanned aircraft users, including consumers and hobbyists, to operate their drones safely. It's really hard to follow rules if you don't know what the rules are, or that the rules apply to you. And so registration gives operators the opportunity to learn the airspace rules before they fly and enjoy their devices safely. Second, registration will help us enforce the rules against those who operate unsafely by allowing the FAA to identify the operators of unmanned aircraft. We can take enforcement action as necessary to protect the airspace for everyone. If unmanned aircraft operators break the rules, clearly there should be consequences, but in fact there can be no accountability if a person breaking the rules can't be identified. Registration will now allow us to identify them. We've done a lot with education and with outreach to inform new users of the airspace, and we'll continue to do that outreach. For example, we've partnered with members of industry and the modeling community to initiate Know Before You Fly outreach campaigns, providing recreational operators with the information they need to fly safely and responsibly. Several unmanned aircraft manufacturers now voluntarily include educational materials in their packaging, and we thank them for that. The San Francisco 49ers football team even partnered with us to record a short commercial to discourage people from flying drones over their stadium. We're also working with many of the nation's major airports on a similar campaign to spread the message that flying around airports and runways is unsafe and will result in stiff penalties and fines. Additionally, the FAA has a national No Drone Zone campaign. The FAA is currently beta testing an app that helps unmanned aircraft operators determine whether there are any restrictions or requirements in effect where they want to fly. This step we're taking today has an added benefit as an additional educational tool. People registering their drones will be exposed to the rules and the reasons for those rules, and we believe this will help reduce some of the incidents I described earlier. But we also want to ramp up on enforcement. We'll be able to instill the accountability for safety that is generally ubiquitous among those responsible model aircraft users and users of the national airspace. And now I want to state the obvious point here. There's still a lot of work to do. This is not the whole solution. This is just a part of it, and the task force will be charged with answering a number of critical questions. But clarifying that federal law requires the registration of all aircraft, including unmanned aircraft, is essential to ensuring accountability and is an important part of our ongoing vigilance on this issue. This is a positive step forward for safety in our skies. By taking this measure, we will create a streamlined registration process for all small drone users and will continue to protect and encourage innovation in our airspace. I also want to assure you that the FAA's ongoing work to quickly and efficiently integrate unmanned aircraft in the national airspace will continue and will not be slowed down by this effort. Earlier this year, we took an important step by releasing a proposed rule. This laid out a flexible framework for allowing the routine commercial use of small unmanned aircraft. The FAA received more than 4,500 public comments on the proposal and is working to address those comments so the rule can be finalized by June of 2016. We're accommodating requests for some commercial operations under our Section 333 exemption process, and to date I have signed off on roughly 2,000 exemptions that allow unmanned aircraft to be used for a variety of purposes. So the registration requirement that we're announcing today will not delay any of this ongoing work, especially the completion of our small UAS rule. With that, I want to conclude by thanking all of our stakeholders for their continued input to ensure the successful integration of unmanned aircraft technology and their unflagging commitment to safety. And now I want to invite one of our guests up here, Brian Wynn of the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Brian, welcome. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and with FAA Administrator Michael Huerta. On behalf of the 7,500 members of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, we welcome the opportunity to join this task force of government and industry stakeholders. This collaborative effort to develop an established framework for UAS operators, allowing anyone who follows the rules to fly. Safety through education is also essential for UAS operations. That's why last year AUVSI, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, and the FAA launched the Know Before You Fly campaign, which seeks to educate newcomers to UAS technology about safe and responsible use. So far, 24 associations, organizations, and businesses from both the manned and unmanned aviation communities have become supporters of Know Before You Fly. These supporters include UAS manufacturers and distributors who are putting Know Before You Fly materials in product packaging at the point of sale and online to provide consumers with the information they need to fly safely. AUVSI is pleased to be part of this initiative and to work with the other task force members on this important issue for the UAS industry and the entire aviation community. With that, it's my pleasure to bring up Rich Hansen, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for the Academy of Model Aeronautics.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Secretary Fox and Mr. Huerta for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. The Academy of Model Aeronautics and its more than 180,000 members across the country recognize the importance of this issue. We stand ready to lend our nearly 80 years of experience in managing the model aircraft community and operating recreational UAS in finding a reasonable and appropriate solution to this issue. Registration of certain UAS that meet an appropriate threshold of weight, capability, and other safety factors makes sense. In fact, AMA's safety program already instructs all members to place their AMA number or their name and address either on or within their aircraft, thus ensuring operator accountability and promoting safety within the model aviation community. This is just one of the many reasons why hundreds of thousands of model aircraft have operated harmoniously within our communities for decades. Even more of these devices are virtually toys that pose little to no risk, have minimal capabilities, and have an extremely short lifespan. The challenge, therefore, will be striking the right balance and setting the criterion threshold for registration at an appropriate and effective level. This process should be streamlined, welcoming, and unobtrusive to allow this emerging industry to flourish and the community of users to continue to enjoy the use of this technology, while necessarily keeping our airspace and our communities safe. At the same time, we will also continue working on the Know Before You Fly campaign that Brian mentioned just shortly, along with the FAA and our other supporters, to provide essential educational tools to the legions of new flyers taking to the skies. We look forward to continuing the advancing of all of these efforts. Thank you very much, and I would like to introduce now Captain Tim Connell, President of the Airline Pilots Association.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Secretary Fox. I am very pleased to be standing here representing not just the 52,000 members of the Airline Pilots Association International, but representing all commercial airline pilots around the world. I can say with confidence that safety is our collective priority. As the operators responsible for flying passengers and cargo, we are hyper-focused on ensuring the safety of our aviation system, including the safe integration of unmanned aircraft systems into the national airspace. ALPA fully supports Secretary Fox's decision to create a task force that will recommend procedures and policies for creating a national registration database for all UAS. In testimony I gave earlier this month at the House Aviation Subcommittee, and I will reiterate later this month at the Senate, I outlined ALPA's recommended 4-point action plan that included a registration component. This simple and necessary tactic will not only allow authorities to immediately identify the owner, but will also drive home the seriousness of operations of these UAS. The FAA Task Force is certainly a step in the right direction, but we also need timely decisions. There is an anticipation of sale of more than 1 million UASs during this year's holiday season. This is on the heels of hundreds of FAA reports of pilots and UAS encounters. With all these safety concerns in mind, the Airline Pilots Association is ready to engage in discussions with its counterparts and to assist the task force in developing the procedures necessary to ensure we maintain the highest levels of safety of our aviation system. Thank you again, Secretary Fox, for your leadership on this important issue.
Now, Administrator Huerta and I will be happy to answer questions. Yeah. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Could you give us some sense of your timeline here? There's been some discussion. You would like to see these rules in place as soon as the Christmas season, but that would kind of sideline or find a way around the regular rulemaking process. So to do that, are you declaring some sort of an emergency condition that allows you to move that rapidly? And can I also ask you quickly, will this technology have any sort of, are you proposing ultimately any kind of a geofencing capability associated with the new regs?
Geofencing isn't the subject of this registration effort, but we do intend to move very quickly. And it is my hope that the task force will complete its recommendations in the middle part of November with the goal of having some rules in place by the middle part of December.
Does that mean, though, that you have to pursue an emergency route to get there, bypassing the normal regulations?
We are looking very carefully at the regulatory process, but we do feel the level of urgency here is sufficient to move as quickly as we possibly can. Yeah.
Secretary, how do you plan to enforce this, particularly with people who already own drones? What's their incentive to register them?
One of the things that this task force will look at is what sorts of provisions should be made for people who already own drones, and that's a recommendation that will be forthcoming from the task force on how to deal with that. But we would expect retroactive registration. There may be a grace period. This task force will have to come up with those solutions.
But how are you going to enforce that? Are you going to send the drone police after people?
Well, look, the reality is that the signal we're sending today is that when you enter the national airspace, it's a very serious matter. This isn't riding your ATV on your own property. This is actually going into the space where other users are also occupying that space. And it is a matter of responsibility that we will take seriously. And again, there are penalties that are associated with failure to do so. Yes?
Given the fact that in many of these incidents, you never find the drones or they're never found, they're just sighted, how do you really see this as holding people accountable or being able to make a big dent in any of these incidents that have happened?
Well, finding the drone has not been as much of a problem as finding the person who was using the drone. And the registration is designed to close that loophole. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The first question is, what kind of information from consumers would be required at this point? What information are you envisioning having to ask an individual when they want to register? And secondly, how possible is it to actually make sure that every single drone is indeed registered? And how do you foresee that you'd be able to prevent someone from skirting the registration system?
So let's start with the first question. In terms of registration, I think the intent here is to create as user-friendly a portal as possible. And again, the task force is going to have to wrestle with some of the questions about how much information to ask from consumers. But clearly identifiable information that helps us point back to the user is going to be critical. Your next question about, I just sort of blanked on your next question, so.
Well, do you believe that it's possible to actually make sure that every single drone that's sold, whether it's online, whether it's in a brick and mortar store, that it is actually registered? How will you make sure that a bad guy, for example, with malicious intent does not skirt the registration system?
Well, so I think we have to compare the before and after. Today, there is no requirement for individual consumers like you and me to register. And so we are now moving towards a registration requirement. I think many, if not most users, will comply because of the attention that we are giving to this issue. But as I said in the previous question, that there are penalties associated with using these devices in the national airspace without complying with the registration requirement.
Mr. Secretary, to use the term drone police, there really are no drone police. The administrator has some civil authority, but if you want to take criminal activity, it's up to local and state authorities. There's all this talk about enforcement, but can you truly enforce somebody who is violating the national airspace?
Well, look, right now, if we have to go through a lot of steps to be able to identify who, in fact, was using a drone. This effort to register will give us the information we need to trace back to the user. That's an important piece of information to help us, and there are actual federal penalties associated with violating the requirement that we will be imposing.
But who in the federal government is going to go after those individuals?
Well, look, I think our typical process is for the Justice Department to prosecute these actions. But again, when you can't identify who, in fact, was using the drone, it makes it very difficult. That's what this registration requirement is designed to fix. And Michael, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
I think the only thing that I would add, David, is this is a partnership that we do with local law enforcement. And the important thing that we're doing today is establishing what the rules are. And the rules are, we're expecting you to be registered if you operate within the national airspace system. With that clarification, which is an authority that we currently have, then that creates a template if you are not operating within with that proper registration. That provides a basis for us to go after you and with our other law enforcement partners. It's a partnership of the FAA, which sets the regulatory framework, working with our law enforcement partners.
Yes.
Hi. Correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I thought MAP 21 said that the FAA wasn't supposed to regulate these hobbyists that are using drones. And so I'm wondering if you have the legal authority here to require this registration, since a lot of the people who are buying these drones, many of them are members of the Academy, but many are not, are just hobbyists.
So we're not requiring licensure of the operators. They're not required to get a license to operate them. In that sense, MAP 21 did have, not MAP 21, the last FAA reauthorization did exclude hobbyists. But when it comes to registration, this is a safety authority the FAA has, and it's one that we're exercising. Yes?
Any manufacturers of drones on this? And secondly, how often will the task force meet, and when will their recommendations be made public?
So this is we've actually been having lots of conversations with manufacturers of drones. As I mentioned before, some of them have actually included some of the educational information that we think is very important for consumers to know in the packaging of the devices. And so those conversations will continue. I'm hopeful that we'll have some who will actually be part of the task force. Michael, you can talk a little bit about process around the task force.
Yes, the Secretary has asked for the task force to complete its work by November 20th. And so they'll meet as often as they need to, and there is a set of questions that we want to work through relating to how we draw the line, how we simplify the process, how we make it as easy for people to do as we possibly can. And then we will take that and implement it, and obviously the goal is to get that in place as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So there was an interesting case study this past summer with an 18-year-old Connecticut student who had a drone that had a semi-automatic gun shooting on his property. So I'm wondering how the the Connecticut feds could take no action because there was no FAA regulation regarding this. So I'm wondering how the task force is going to be considering gun control, gun safety when dealing with drone
It's
registration.
illegal to drop anything from an aircraft operating in the National Airspace System, and but this whole range of issues of how do we ensure safe operation is what we're trying to get at, and registration is a very important point on that.
But it's technically still legal.
No, it is illegal to drop anything or shoot anything from any aircraft operating in the National Airspace System.
But on private property, though.
And I will add that this task force that we're setting up today is the registration task force. There's a wider sweep task force. The ARC is also working on these issues as well. Last question.
Follow up about the numbers of close calls that you mentioned. You said the pilots have reported double the number of last year. Mr. Huerta, the numbers seem a little bit confusing and have been confusing for a few months. So you set the record straight on how many incidents or reports of actual aircraft intrusions, drone intrusions. Can you give us some hard data or numbers we can work on?
Well, Tom, we are certainly seeing a significant increase in reports. And clearly, this is an industry that is taking off, and there is a lot of activity taking place in the National Airspace System, and that's what concerns us. The educational component the Secretary talked about is an important part of that. The enforcement activities that we've been undergoing, that's an important part of it. But registration provides us an opportunity to tie the aircraft with the operator, which is another tool in the toolbox going forward. And ultimately what we're trying to do is also use this as an opportunity to educate new users of unmanned aircraft of how to operate in the National Airspace System. This is all part of a whole set of things that we're doing as we work to integrate this technology into our system.
Do you envision with this registration that there's a way to detect the drone? Or are you going to have to recover an errant drone in order to trace it back to the user? Is there going to be a transponder of some kind? Otherwise, I don't understand how it helps in the bulk of the reports.
Look, this is about having a national registry of folks who are owners of drones and users of drones. And as I've said before, our challenge so far has not been identifying the drone itself. It's been connecting it back to the person who is using it, and this will help us deal with that effectively. This is not about transponders or geofencing. This is about the connection.
Just if you don't understand.
Well,
Pilot reports a drone flying near JFK, and you're able to trace it back to the user. How?
well, we identify the drone. We collect the information on the drone, and the drone is cross-checked against the National Registry.
Getting the drone, or will you be able to collect that data remotely?
These are the types of issues that this task force is going to deal with, but my bottom line point is you do have to have some access to the drone to connect it back to the user. I don't think that's going to be as big of a problem as you may think it is, because in most instances, we've actually seen the drone, we just haven't seen the person operating it.
Thank you very much. Secretary, Administrator, I believe some of the other participants here may be willing to take questions if you are, please stay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Any questions for any of the other folks here?